Okay, good morning. Happy Monday. Y'all, I have to use a microphone so the people on Zoom can hear, so y'all get to hear me extra well. I was always one of those teachers, what I like to teach with my door open, and you could always hear me talking from down the hall, and people would be like, "Oh, I heard y'all were reading that book today," and I was like, "Yep." Without the microphone, with the microphone, it kind of is the same. Actually, I'm not sure if the microphone's working, so maybe it is just the same. But anyways, good morning. I'm really excited to spend some time with you this morning talking about all things math. So I am Catherine Kane Geit. I am part of your NWEA Kentucky team. Some of y'all look familiar. I was here back in January, at the end of January, right after the snowstorm, right? So if you can place the snowstorm, you can place me. I was here back in January alongside Tiffany Arce. So I am part of your larger Kentucky team. I have lots of members of your Kentucky team here to hang out with you. So my name is Catherine, and I'll just kind of let y'all go around just to introduce yourself so everyone can put a face to a name. So we are going to kick it off. And we're here to talk about map growth and map reading fluency today, just to see. A lot of y'all have been using map for quite a while, right? So y'all might be ahead of the game here, but does anyone know what map stands for? It is an acronym. Does anyone know? Measures of academic progress. So let's try that again. What does MAP stand for? Measures of academic progress. So you can at least go back to your districts and say, I taught you one thing today, right? Measures of academic progress. So we have MAP growth, which makes sense because with MAP growth, we are measuring the academic progress of students from beginning to middle to end of the year, but also year after year after year. And then we have MAP reading fluency, which is that early literacy foundational skills assessment. And we are going to spend some time talking about data from both of these today. And so just in terms of how map growth and map reading fluency data comes together, they both give you data, but the types of data that they give you are different. So map growth, that is that K-12 universal screener, tightly aligned to the Kentucky state standards. It has projections to the KSA from grades 2 through 10. All of these great things happening within map growth. Now, map reading fluency gives us data on students' foundational reading skills as they are developing those skills that they need in order to learn how to read. And so oftentimes in our younger grades, students are learning how to read while they are reading to learn. They happen simultaneously, right? Which is why oftentimes in those younger grades, you look at data from both map growth and map reading fluency to truly see how your students are doing as learners and as readers. And so just from a show of hands, how many of y'all use map growth? Okay. From a show of hands, how many of y'all use map reading fluency? So I see some, but not all. So we're going to spend time talking about data from both today. And when we get to the map reading fluency part, it might be helpful for you to learn a little bit about what kind of data map reading fluency provides if you don't use it. But also when we're really digging into data, really, you have a lot of people here. You can get some one-on-one tutoring if you need to, or some two-on-one, some small group tutoring. And so we're going to spend that time talking about your data and how you can use that to impact your next steps, because it's still the fall. We're still at the start of school. So we still have a long way to go for our learners. Bless you. In terms of, here we go. In terms of Senate Bill 9. Now, I know everyone has heard about Senate Bill 9, Reads to Succeed Act, and I love reading. I spent all my time teaching in the elementary building, and I taught ELA. So anything reading, writing, I love it. Now, the Reads to Succeed Act kind of fits into me and Ashley's sweet spot because we love talking about early literacy. Now, in terms of Senate Bill 9 requirements, you got to have a universal screener and a diagnostic. Now, map growth sits in that universal screening lane. Map reading fluency sits in that diagnostic lane because it gives you more in-depth information about some of those foundational reading skills, so you can utilize data from map reading fluency to help inform some of those reading plans. And so there are a lot of district data uses from MAP data. I'm not going to read all these to you because a lot of you probably know them, but I will have you popcorn out any ways that you are using MAP growth or MAP reading fluency data to impact instruction in some way, whether it's at the district or the campus level.
Develop our reading plans.
So using MAP reading fluency data to develop those reading plans. I'm just going to repeat what you're saying, not because we can't hear you, but so people on the Zoom can hear you. So if I'm repeating you, it's not because I can't hear you, but to inform reading plans. Awesome. How else? When I was a teacher, I used MAP growth data to goal set with my students so that they knew where we wanted them to get at the end of the year and who might need to grow a little bit more.
Target mode that started achieving them to grow. Oh, sorry. We like to, when we get those kids that are close, not quite at the 9th say 9, which is what we have to have for GT placement. But when we get them close, we talk to the principals and the teachers and just tell them, you know, because that can motivate them, and they take the MAP test 3 times a year. So we tell them, you know, you got really close this time, so, you know, try your best. The next time it could be 2 or 3 more correct questions that get you there.
Yeah, exactly. And so when you use MAP data to inform cut points for other things, whether it's GT placement, whether it's for MTSS, RTI, whether that's for, advanced course placement, when you use that data for things like that, you can really help you see who your bubble kiddos are, especially with those projections to KSA, right? If they are sitting there right on the bubble, then hey, I can probably push them, and it might be easier to get them from here to here than get a kid from here all the way over here, right? So you can use it as a motivation tool for students and really help you identify who those bubble kiddos are. Awesome. Anything else that y'all want to share?
Catherine, we had someone on the chat say, I always loved the MAP reports that gave suggested topics for kids within each RTI band or
RIT, R-I-T.
Or sorry, RIT band. I also use the MAP score in math on Khan Academy mappers to provide kids with individualized curriculum. And that was Amanda.
Awesome, Amanda. So you're talking about Khan Academy, some of our instructional connections. We are going to talk about that. You're making that data work for you, right? You're not double assessing your students. You're taking this really great, strong data, and you're using it to connect with some of our instructional partners to provide that personalized blended learning. And Amanda, I love what you were talking about, using that learning continuum, that content explorer to help you see what that RIT score looks like for students at each RIT level. Awesome. Awesome. So there are a lot of great data uses. It depends on your role. It depends on the time of year. And it depends on what else you got going on, how that data is used for. But know that when we have strong data from a universal screener, that data can be used to inform a lot of things at the district level to make sure you have everything streamlined. And so I've been doing some talking, but I want to make sure that we use this time to make sure we address your needs, because you're going to hear from me digging into some MAP growth data. You're going to hear from Ashley digging into some MAP reading fluency data. But are there any burning questions or hot topics that you want to learn a lot about, or you want to make sure you know the answer to before you walk out that door? Well, you don't have to wait to the end to ask your questions. Ask your questions right now, or ask your questions as they pop into your head, because we want to make sure your whole Kentucky team, we want to make sure that you get whatever you need to get out of this time before you get in your car and you go back to your campuses or your districts. And so we thank you for your time today. So how does MAP fit into your assessment system? Well, there are a lot of different lanes of assessment, and they have different purposes. MAP growth fits in this universal screener lane. It's normed referenced. It gives you that achievement and that growth data. It gives you those projections to the KSA because it is aligned to our Kentucky standards. And it gives you actionable data. And that's typically taken 3 times a year. MAP growth, universal screeners, have a different purpose than our formative assessments. Your teachers are giving formative assessments every day, every week. Exit tickets, unit tests, weekly tests, really tightly aligned to, hey, I taught these 3 standards this week. Let me assess that on Friday to see if my kids mastered those standards, right? Formative assessments still have a place within a comprehensive assessment system. MAP growth is just that universal screener that's tracking that consistent data from beginning to middle to end of the year as students progress throughout their grade level. And then, of course, we have the KSA that your students take at the end of the year that is tightly aligned to the standards of that grade level. My 4th grade students spent all year learning so many things. At the end of the year, they're being assessed on those standards to see how they mastered or to see how they did in terms of understanding that grade level content. So there is a comprehensive assessment system. MAP sits in that universal screener space. When I think of MAP, I like to think of GPS. Now, I obviously had to use the GPS to get here this morning because we stayed in London last night. And when I plugged it in, there's multiple ways that you can get there, right? There's multiple ways to get to point B from point A. So this is a screenshot of how to get to Austin from San Antonio. And you'll see that there's 3 different ways. Going straight up, the interstate is one way, it's the fastest, but sometimes I don't like to drive on the interstate. Sometimes there's traffic. You don't know what you can expect when you get halfway through, and then there might be an accident and you're sitting in traffic. You can also avoid highways, and you can go this way, and you can also go this way using tolls. There are multiple ways to get from point A to point B. MAP growth data helps you see those different ways. All of your students, you want to get all students from point A to point B, but there are different ways that you can go to get there, and MAP growth can help chart those paths for you. Now, MAP growth might be the GPS, but teachers are the ones driving the car. Even if you're following the GPS to the T, does the GPS tell you when you need gas? No. Does the GPS tell you when you need to switch lanes? No. The driver of the car makes those decisions, just like the teacher makes those decisions for what's best for their students in the moment. Hey, I might need to switch lanes because I've been trying this one strategy to teach Matt how to read, and Matt is not grasping that strategy. Let me switch lanes, try a different strategy to help Matt learn how to read, right? That data is telling me what I need to work with Matt on. The data is telling me where I need Matt to be, but it's not necessarily telling me when I need to switch lanes, when I need to get gas, when I need to pull over and stop and get something to eat because my stomach's growling. So MAP growth, that GPS, your teachers are the ones driving the car. And using this MAP data, and hopefully today, you're going to have a really good, strong Garmin GPS to help you know how you can help your teachers get all of your students from point A to point B. And so let's talk about MAP growth. We know that MAP is available in lots of subjects: reading, math, language, usage, and science. And the data that you get, reading, math, language, and science, comes in a RIT score. And no matter what subject, what grade, that RIT score or that assessment is computer adaptive. They take the assessment. It gets harder as they get questions right. It gets easier as they get questions wrong. But based on this picture, and also based what you know about MAP, about how many questions right, or what was that percentage on average of right versus wrong? There's a picture on the screen you can use to count. Sometimes people like to count and do that math in the moment, but you can kind of guesstimate it. You won't be wrong. It's not a trick question either. what's that percentage of right versus wrong, correct versus incorrect? It's about 50%. Every student and every grade on every subject get about 50% correct. They get about half right and half wrong. But the rigor of those questions looks different. And so as our students are growing from beginning to middle of the year, as they're growing from a 183 to a 194, they're not getting more questions right. They're getting harder questions correct. And so when you see those bubble kids, they might be at the 88th percentile, but you want them to be at the 90th percentile for that GT qualification. It's not getting them to get more questions right. It's getting them to be able to do more rigorous math problems, to read and comprehend more complex reading passages. And so when we see this RIT score that we know so much about, this RIT score is tied to rigor. It's tied to the difficulty level of items in relation to our Kentucky state standards. And so every student, regardless of their performance level, the highest achieving students in your district or in your campus, the lowest achieving students in your district or on your campus are going to be getting about half right and half wrong. But the rigor of those questions are going to look vastly different, right? And so as we're digging into this math data today, I want you to be thinking about rigor. I want you to be thinking about what rigor might look like for a student that's working at the 85th percentile versus what that rigor might look like for students that are working down at the 15th percentile. And then what Amanda online typed in the chat, she's talking about that learning continuum, that content explorer to explore the rigor at different RIT levels. We're going to be seeing what that rigor looks like. And so when we think about how to impact tier 1 instruction, we have some context surrounding that. And so that RIT score, it's tied to item difficulty. It's tied to rigor. The higher the RIT score, the more difficult the items are. The lower the RIT score, the less difficult, the less rigorous. And so I pulled up some math standards, second grade math, addition, subtraction, place value, because that is an abstract concept for some of our students. And so I'm looking at the learning continuum, which is a content explorer. And you'll see that students that fall in this lower RIT band here, they're engaging with this standard. And I can see that they're working on comparing whole numbers within 1,000 using terms. I see that in terms of adding 4-digit numbers within 100, they're engaging with that standard, but they're not regrouping, right? And look at how the rigor shifts when we look at a higher RIT band, a higher RIT level. They're comparing whole numbers using terms, but now using symbols. And down here, they're adding whole numbers within 100 with regrouping. So you see both groups of students are engaging with this standard. Both groups of students can access this tier 1 instruction, but you can see that the rigor level looks a little bit different for a lower RIT range group than a higher RIT range group. And so if my lesson for the week was focused all on regrouping, which group of students might need a little bit of scaffolding to allow them to access that material? Is it these kiddos over here? It's these kiddos over here. Now, does it mean that these kiddos need to be put in a small group and not taught that tier 1 lesson? No. They can still access and engage with the standard. They might need a little bit more scaffolding to access the rigor of regrouping. Now, the same is true for secondary. ELA, I pulled up, you'll see the higher the RIT range, the more difficult, the more complex those reading passages are. And I pulled up some 8th grade standards focused on theme. And you'll see both groups of students are engaging with this standard. So both groups of students are ready for that tier 1 instruction. But you'll see the rigor level looks a little bit different. This lower group, determining theme in a literary text. This higher group, analyzing how setting contributes to theme, determining details that support the theme. So you see while they're both engaging with theme, this higher group is able to do a little bit more rigorous things within theme. How does setting contribute to theme, right? Both groups can access these standards, so they're ready for tier 1 instruction. But if my lessons for the week focus on what all goes into theme, what are those details that you get from the text, show me that text evidence that really help you know what the theme is, this lower group might need a little bit more scaffolding for access and being able to figure out what contributes to that theme. And so I'm going to pause here to see if there are any questions or wonderings or aha moments surrounding how this learning continuum can really help you see which students might need some scaffolding, which students might need some extension, and then which students are most likely ready for that tier 1 instruction. Anything from online? Not yet. All right, I'll keep talking. Y'all know y'all can interrupt me if and when something pops up. And so we have normative data. Normative data is great. Now, y'all, you love those RIT scores, and you'll probably know all about those percentiles. Do y'all look at these charts a lot? Yes, no, maybe so. If you do, that's great. If you don't, that's great too. Now, when I was a baby teacher, I had this printed out, and this is my Bible. It's not the Bible, because let me tell you what this tells you. It tells you the average score for a particular grade level at a specific point in time. This is not the magic number. If you have a 4th grader who's getting a score of a 214, are you going to take that 4th grader, put him in your car, drive him over to the middle school, drop him off and say, hey, baby, have fun at middle school. You're now in a 6th grade level. I'll see you later. No. This is not telling you grade level readiness. It's not that magic score that means the student is on that grade level. It's telling me the average score for a 6th grader at beginning of the year in math is a 214. And so these charts are great, but what's even better is the percentiles that you get from them. So the average score, so for 6th grade math, 214, for our percentiles, it's going to fall right smack in the middle at the 50th percentile. That is the average score. Now, half of our students are going to be below the 50th percentile. Half of our students are going to be above the 50th percentile. Because that's how math works. When we have something in the middle, half are below, half are above. And so every report that you are going to see has percentiles on it. So whether you look at this or you just look at the percentile translate this for you based on instructional weeks, because that matters. And so when you look at your percentiles, our normative data allows you to see how your students are performing compared to their grade level peers. And so every student has an achievement percentile. Every student has a growth percentile. And these percentiles help you answer these questions. How does my 4th grader score compare with other 4th graders? How does my 10th grader score compare with other 10th graders? What is the median percentile for my students? For my students, median is midpoint. Where is that midpoint? If I see that median percentile for my 7th grade math class, that median percentile is in the orange, then that means that midpoint of my students is lower. So that math class is a little bit lower than average overall. If I have a median percentile that's fallen over here in the green at the 80th percentile, then my 7th grade math class is a higher performing math class than average. It also allows me to answer this question. Do my students' performance represent typical grade level performance or atypical? And I love this question. I'm going to say it again. Do my students' performance represent typical grade level performance or atypical? And so when I'm looking at what these colors mean, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, we know that red light, stop signs, colors on ambulance, that's kind of a flash and, hey, I might need some help, right? And when I look at the percentiles, what those colors coordinate to, I'll see that red, low, orange, low average, yellow average, green high average, blue high. And so, which three colors have the word average in them? Orange, yellow, green. And we know average is a synonym for typical, right? And so when you see students that are falling in the orange, the yellow, or the green, more or less typical grade level performance. Now, if you have a student that's at the 21st percentile, they're in the orange, but just barely. It's one of those bubble kids, right? Does that mean that, hey, I don't have to worry about them at all? They're in the orange. They're good. No. You can proceed with caution, but also keep a lookout, because if they're at the 21st, 22nd, 23rd, 24th, they're the bubble, right? They're closer to low than they are to average, right? Now, if you have a student that's at the 35th percentile, they're closer to average than they are to low, right? So when you're thinking about your orange, sometimes I like to kind of look at the lower orange and the higher orange. Are they closer to low, or are they closer to average? And I know that when a lot of you are using this map growth data for universal screening purposes for Senate Bill 9, you're typically looking at that 30th percentile or lower, right? You might have some local norms where you might look at a different number, but students that are in low orange, they're closer to low than they are to average. Now, let's just, for easy sake, say orange, yellow, green, kind of representing typical performance. Then that means I have two colors left that represent atypical. What are those two colors? Red and blue. But that atypical performance looks different, doesn't it? Right? Now, red, those are my kiddos that need extra help, and they need scaffolding to help them access that grade level material. And these blue students, they need some extension. They might need the teachers in the classroom to push their thinking to make them apply their knowledge in a more rigorous way. So while red and blue both are showing us atypical performance, it's telling us a different story, because red and blue, vastly different in terms of performance and vastly different in terms of the things that those students are most likely tackling on a regular basis. And so as we begin to go into your map growth reports, we're going to be looking at these colors, of course, but I want you thinking about orange, yellow, and green as most likely typical, knowing once again, I said students in this lower half of orange might fall closer to the red, just like students in this upper half of green might fall closer to the blue, right? So knowing that there's some wiggle room on either side. And so be seeing which students in your district or your campus overall have that typical performance, and then which students have atypical, and what type of atypical. There was a slide I thought was going to pop up next and it didn't, but that's okay. It's fine. So when we're looking at that RIT score, it is one score that helps us answer a lot of questions. It helps us dig into where are my students currently falling in terms of achievement. The second one's my favorite. Oops. All about growth. What is the impact of our instruction? Our teachers are doing amazing things in those classrooms every single day. What is the impact that is having on student growth? It helps us track proficiency. Are our students on track for KSA? Are they on track for ACT? And then it allows us to think about which high quality instructional platforms best meet the needs of my students. So it helps us answer a lot of different questions with one score. And the reason why we can use one score to answer a bunch of different questions is because of the validity and the reliability that comes with that score. You have to be able to trust that the data you're using to answer these questions is accurate. And with map growth, you can, because that standard error of measure is so small. Now we're going to dive a little bit deeper into those instructional content. It's what Amanda, I believe, on the computer earlier talked about, connecting her map growth data to Khan Academy. Map growth data connects with so many instructional content providers that utilize the map growth score as a placement into personalized learning platforms. And so there are a lot. And I essentially am showing this because if you are using any of these on the screen, please make sure your map data is talking to these, because we want this data to work smarter for you, not harder. All right. And so if you scan this QR code, which you'll get these slides afterwards, so don't worry. If you scan this QR code, it will take you to a page that gives you more. It's blocked. Or you can just Google NWEA instructional connections and it pops up. I love Google. Don't y'all? Yeah, Google's great. And we have our linking studies. Now, do all of y'all know that our linking studies go through 10th grade now? Our linking studies for map growth to the KSA goes through 10th grade for math and reading. So for your 9th graders and your 10th graders, we have those projections to the KSA. I also want to call out for 5th and 8th grade, those students that take the language KSA assessment, we have projections to the language in 5th and 8th grade from the map growth language assessment. And so if your students have if you have reading map growth at your campus or your district, you also have access to that language, right? It comes with it. You might not be using it, but you have access to it. So make sure you talk to us if you want to see if you have maybe your 5th grade and 8th graders that you won't taking that language assessment. And then for 4th and 7th grade, we have projections to the science KSA. And essentially when we're talking about these projections, we're looking at two scales. We're looking at that RIT scale and we're looking at that KSA scale, proficiency scale. And we look at real Kentucky data from so many of our partner districts who shared that data with us. So we can see what the projections from map growth to KSA are. And most often than not, they hit the nail on the head. They hit it right on the nose, knowing that, once again, if they're right here, they're our bubble kids, no matter what, right? And this is kind of the behind the curtain, behind the scenes of, I like to call it Wizard of Oz, behind the curtain. It's easier to look at in our reports, but behind the curtain, you can see those RIT scores and those percentiles. And so I have this up because when we're looking at our reports and insights, and we're going to get to those in a second, we're going to be looking at our colors to help us see which students have that typical performance, which students have that atypical performance. But we're also going to be looking at some of our cut scores, because typically in the MTS RTI space, we're looking at below the 30th percentile, saying, hey, maybe we need to dig into these students, look at some other data points, maybe look at map reading fluency data.
We had a question in the chat. Amanda said, will this linking study be coming for SS soon?
For social studies, I'm assuming SS is social studies. So map growth does not have a social studies assessment. So we do not have a separate social studies or history assessment. Now, I will say that in order to utilize data for social studies and history teachers, oftentimes those social studies and history teachers look at that reading data because our reading test has a lot of informational passages and historical passages on it. So to utilize the data, we recommend looking at reading, but we do not have a separate social studies map growth assessment, which means that we do not have on our roadmap to have a KSA projection because we do not have that an assessment that really assesses those social studies standards as deep as they need to be in order to have a linking study.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm going to give you the mic just so the people online can hear.
In gifted and talented, we are not allowed to accept KSA as as the official test. Now it can be used as the secondary test, but not the what's the word I'm looking for? The primary test like we can map because it's norm referenced. Now 5th and 8th grade on KSA, they take the social studies test. So there's no way that we could work with someone to make that become a norm reference test just for 5th and 8th grades for social studies. But I also understand what you're saying about looking at the language arts and the reading, because even our screeners that we use for social studies, it's a lot of times even hard to tell it's social studies. It's more of a reading test anyway.
Yeah.
So that is, good advice to look at that for history as well. But I would love, right now we have to use the Iowa test. We had to order an Iowa test for social studies specifically. But yeah, it would be nice if we could somehow get a norm referenced social studies test.
No, I really appreciate that context, and I definitely understand it, right? You got to have that norm reference piece. The thing about social studies that I will say, in order to get a test, the social study, there are so many standards for social studies, and every single grade those standards are different, and in every single state those standards are different. So it is something that we have talked about internally, and I'll take that feedback back to our content teams and just say, hey, we got this question again. But it is a heavier lift than you might think, just due to how tightly we align our test questions to the standards, right? But in terms of looking at how students are performing, looking at that reading test, because there's so many informational passages on it, is a really good indicator of where they might be. Yeah. No, you have nothing to apologize. Questions are wonderful. Go ahead.
It says, Megan said, will the linking study be extended to high school science?
When we get enough students testing, yes, it will be. So we have NWEA, y'all know us. We've been around the block a lot of times together, and you know that we have put research first, right? And so we have a high threshold of test events that we need, that districts are willing to share with us before we can produce a linking study. So my hopes are, yes, but I can't tell you exactly when, because we have to have enough test events that districts are willing to share with us in order to be able to do that. So not yet, but maybe. Here's to hoping. Y'all are asking great questions, and I love that y'all are asking them in the moment, because if you wait to the end and you when I call for questions, it might not be in your head anymore. So now we're going to get into the fun part, and we're going to begin to look at a few different reports, whatever level you are, whether we want to look at the district, the school, the class report, you're going to see these colors. And these colors are going to be tied to these percentiles. Also tying to these cut scores. In order to be projected to fall in that proficient bucket for KSA, it differs by grade level, but you'll see here for math, it's around the 58th through the 59th percentile. So I rounded up to about 60. If our students are at or above the 60th percentile, then most likely they're projected into that proficient bucket. Now, if they're right there at the 59th percentile, right there at the 60th percentile, they're still on the bubble, aren't they? Could be a day of. They're sitting on top of the fence. Which way is the wind going to blow that way? Are they going to fall over here? Are they going to sway down here? So we're going to start to look at those colors too, but also know that this isn't one data point. There are a lot of other data points that you have to pull from where your students are. Now, in order to make sure that I am best answering your questions or meeting your needs, does anyone have a specific report that they want to spend a little bit more time digging into whole group? So that might benefit you more, whether it's district profile, school profile, the class profile, because it looks different this year in a good way. Or is it going to be dealer's choice and I'm the dealer? District profile. All right. So we're going to look at the district profile, and we're going to see these colors: red, orange, yellow, green, blue. And we know what these colors are telling us. Okay. So let me log in, because it logs you out if you've been sitting there idle for too long like me. And I'm so glad it remembers my password for me, because yep. Okay. So I do have it zoomed in, so hopefully our friends online can see it, but I'm going to explore the district profile. And so I see it popped right here under popular reports. And you'll have to forgive me. I was last weekend, so a little over a week ago, I was staying with my parents, and I left my glasses there. And they mailed me my glasses, but the mail kind of got disrupted by the hurricane. So my glasses have yet to arrive to me. So I have been glassesless for about a week, but I don't really need glasses unless I look at the computer. So now I'm looking at the computer. So please bear with me. Okay. So within my district profile, and I do have to say, my district profile is full of fake data. The students in my fake system do not respond the way that your students do. All right. So if something looks a little bit wonky, let's just chalk it up to this is sandbox fake data. Okay. So you'll see at the top, we have two tabs. One about single term achievement, which is looking at fall data because I'm looking at my fall data here. So single term is looking at one specific term, BOI data or EOI data, MOI data, whatever term you designate. Now, if I was to go over to this growth and achievement tab, I would be able to choose the terms I want to compare. So for example, I'm now looking at winter data to spring data. So I'm looking at MOI data to EOI data. So in both terms, single term is one specific term. You choose that term. Growth and achievement, you're looking at two terms and you're comparing the achievement between term 1 and term 2, whatever it is that you designate. And so when I scroll down here, it's showing me my district overall. I see in my district, I have a little under 5,000 students. And I see how many students fall in each colored band. Now you'll see this right here in a circle over on the left-hand side. This is showing me the median achievement percentile. So it's showing me that midpoint. So the midpoint for my district overall is falling in the yellow range, which is that average range. So I see that achievement for my district overall is average. I see that I have a fair amount of students in blue. I have a fair amount of students in red too. And then I have a little over half my students falling in that typical performance. But I have more students that have atypical performance than I do typical performance. So that's just letting me know my district overall. Now let me break it down a little bit more, and I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to see the performance for each grade level. I see once again in that bubble, that median achievement percentile, that midpoint. So I see that midpoint for my kinder average. Look at my grades 1, 2, and 3. That midpoint is above average, right? So achievement overall for grades 1, 2, and 3 is higher than average. For grades 4, 5, 6, it goes down to yellow again, back down to average. And then when I get up into my high school, while it's still an average, it's climbing back into the 50s. So I see overall, grades 6, 7, and 8, while it's still average, we're in the 40s. So it looks like overall, across my district, I might see a little bit of dip in terms of achievement within my middle school grades, which is not abnormal. If y'all you're nodding and you say, yeah, middle school, we typically see a dip there. 7th grade, especially. And that's even true in my fake data. How did it know? 7th grade, especially, bless them, right? Now I see in my elementaries that we have some higher achievement. Maybe. Now this isn't telling me why, is it? But it can give me the data that I need to in order to pull back the layers of the onion, ask some questions. Well, what is it that my early literacy my early elementary teachers are doing? Well, maybe they have a focus on early literacy. Maybe they're really utilizing the data from their screeners and their diagnostics to inform their instruction. Maybe these reading plans are working for these students because I see less students in the red than I do in other grade levels, right? So it's not telling me why, but it's giving me the data to lean together with my thought partners at the district or at my campus to start asking some of those questions. Now, here is something to do. If you have multiple schools at the elementary, the middle, or the high school level, I can expand into grade 1. So I can click in grade 1, and it's going to show me my different schools with my different elementary schools across my campus. And I see here, this tells a little bit of a different story, doesn't it? I have a high achieving elementary school, 2 high-ish achieving elementary schools, and 1, while average, lower achieving elementary school, right? So I can break it down and see achievement across my campus. I could even break it down. I'm going to my high achieving school and I want to see what's going on within that school. Is it consistent across the board? Because it breaks it down by teacher too. And I see, yes, wow, it typically is consistent across the board. This is where that fake data comes in. In what school in the world are you going to have exactly 3 classes that look exactly the same, right? But I can see, it's pretty evenly spread at this elementary school. It's not like I have 2 teachers that are knocking out of the park and I have 1 teacher that might need a little bit extra support, right? So it's helping me peel back the layers of the onion to see what is going on there. Now I'm going to go back to my district profile. Now I'm going to switch over to this growth and achievement tab. You choose those terms that you want to look at. And this might be a little bit more applicable for you all in the winter after you have that MOI data. But when you scroll down, it's going to show you that median growth percentile. So that where that midpoint of growth is for the district overall. We're sitting in average, but just barely. So this district overall, we have less than average growth. And then I can see the impact that that less than average growth has on my achievement. My median achievement percentile in the winter was 50. Median achievement percentile in the spring was 47. So there was a slight drop. And that's because my students are performing slightly less than average. And if they have slightly less than average growth, how does that impact achievement? If we grow less than average, over time, we're going to see a dip in achievement. If we hit average growth, nail on the head, our achievement's going to stay the same. If we have greater than average achievement, what happens to our growth over time? We see an increase, right? So you can look and see the impact that growth has on your achievement for the whole school, for each particular grade level, and each particular school. Now, I do want to call out 2nd grade. Remember, 2nd grade was one of those green grades in terms of achievement, right? Look at where they're sitting in terms of growth. They have a low average growth. They're growing their students less than average. So I see the impact that that has on their achievement. Now, in order to give you a little bit of time to dig into your data, I'm going to stop talking. Would it be helpful? Let me ask the question first. Would it be helpful for you to open your computers and get into your data? Or would it be helpful for me to turn it over to Ashley, start talking about map reading fluency data, and then leave some time for data exploration at the end? So you could either dig into your map reading fluency or your map growth data, which should be more helpful. Option 1, which is explore map growth now. Option 2 is let's turn it over to Ashley, dig into map reading fluency, and have time to explore both at the end. 2. Okay. So option 2 looks like it is what it is. And so I'm going to get your slides pulled up, Ashley, and then I'm going to turn it over to Ashley. Now, if you are one of those districts that are not using map reading fluency, you can continue to learn to see how map reading fluency could help you. You could also
Popular woman, look at all those emails.
I know. I'm gonna close my mouth. I just wanted to get her slides.
Yeah, and you don't have to start at the beginning of it.
I'll let you choose.
Okay.
And then I'm gonna leave the clicker here for you.
Appreciate it. All right, it's time for our early literacy party. Let's get the party started. Let me not. All right. So I really do want you to kind of think back to where we started to and really think about you came here with a purpose. And it wasn't just to get the muffins this morning and the little treats that we have too, but really think about what you need to be successful moving forward too. So please make sure that this time is very intentional for you. What I want you to do is to think about this. Last week, I was with some partners actually in Pennsylvania, the Erie
area. And I heard this educator, I'm going to always quote people because I won't steal anyone's work, but something that he said really resonated with me. He said, when you hear no, that means your educators are not in the know. So what can we do when you hear the NO? That means they're not in the KNOW. So what can we do to make sure our educators feel knowledgeable and successful with what we have in front of them as well? So to help us keep them in the know, we're going to talk about 4 key terms in map reading fluency. And in the essential reports training that typically comes right after they've done their first round of map reading fluency training, they go through all of the terms that they'll need to know to be successful with understanding the reports. But just for today, we're going to talk about 4. So if you have a piece of paper, jot down these 4 different terms because we're going to be taking notes on those as well. The first one is performance level. You can make it into like a square too. It's up to you. Domain score. And I love a fun slide, so that's why you see it in cursive. So sorry if cursive is a little hard to translate. ZPD level, that is. And then that last one is Lexile or reading measure. So as you're also writing down these terms, hopefully these are resonating with you as you're thinking about the map reading fluency data that you probably dove into already this school year. And I will also share slides with you as well, because I have some hyperlinked resources in here that I really want you to have as you're continuing to study when I'm not in front of you anymore. Apparently, I can't stay here forever, they say. I guess I have to go back home with my husband and family. Okay. So, oh, and that got cut off a little bit, but it's okay. There's going to be 4 reports that we're going to talk about together too. 2 of them are the individual student reports for foundational skills and oral reading. And at the very top was the benchmark matrix report and the instructional planning report. So if you put BM report, that's benchmark matrix. That is an interesting acronym, right? BM, benchmark matrix report, and then instructional planning. You could put IP. And these are the reports that we want to make sure teachers feel confident in. Those 4 reports. There's a lot of reports that they have access to, but really those 4 we want them to be very well versed in to help with those reading plans and really understand where their kids are within their reading acquisition. Okay, so let's dive into these key vocabulary words for map reading fluency. Sometimes it feels like alphabet soup, right? But hopefully we make it a little bit more simple. So when you get this slide deck, you're going to have access to these hyperlinks too. But does anyone want to take a stab at what is a performance level? And we're educators, so we are perfectionists. We want everything correct, but it's okay. Participation matters too. There you go. You say proficient, distinguished, you are on the money. So if you look at the color codes and some of the reports, we also have colors in map reading fluency. The only color that's missing from map growth is orange. But we have the blue that shows that they're exceeding the grade level expectations, green, meeting, yellow, approaching, red. And then we know the no score and no expectation too. But what it's going to do is let you know how their performance is in terms of grade level expectations. Like, hey, is this okay? Is this not okay? Do I need a little bit more support? That no expectation comes in a few grades. So kindergarten, fall, sentence reading fluency, there's no expectation. It is great if a kindergartner can read a sentence in the fall, but it's not expected for them to do that. And no expectation will come up again in the fall for oral reading rate. It's great if there's a first grader in the fall that can read a connected text, but if they can't, that is okay. We're working towards that by the end of the year. So there are no norms for rate there. But for the most part, you should see that color coding for all those domains in math, reading, fluency. And what those performance levels are telling you is that is the instruction currently sufficient with making sure they're accessing those standards-based targets, grade and seasonal expectations. And you find them in a few reports, the benchmark matrix, which we'll look at today together. And then district level report will be that term summary, term comparison for teachers. In the student report, you'll see those color codes in there too. Domain score. Has anyone seen domain score? It's kind of like a RIT score. Give you a little hint. It's not like a performance level. It's a domain score, kind of like a RIT score. What do RIT scores tell you? How like tall a student is somewhat. Domain scores are found in the screener outcomes report, but they're also a part of the progress monitoring too. And what's great about that score is that it almost quantifies the child's performance. And now they have a norm reference measure. So they have a criterion reference measure with that below, approaching, meeting, exceeding expectations. And now we can consider how they're performing in an entire domain. And phonological awareness, how are they performing compared to their peers? Or in phonics and word recognition, or language comprehension too. And you're able to compare this information across their peers, across grades as well. And what it's supposed to do is really help you allocate resources. So when I say allocate resources, I mean more so making sure the right students are in the right seats. So if I have a child at the lower percentiles, 20 percentile and below, this may be a child that receives more intense intervention in that specific domain versus a child who might be at the 80th percentile. And we have norms for that as well, so you can see what is typical growth of that student too. And it's found on 2 reports, screener outcomes report, and then for progress monitoring in the foundational skills domains too. All right, we're on our 3rd word, ZPD level. If you know math, reading, and fluency, you heard of this one. Or Vygotsky's theory from Education 101, right? Like, I never knew that was like really going to come back in real life, like when you became a teacher. But it's here. Vygotsky's theory, ZPD level. Remember, map growth, they're supposed to get how many correct? Yeah, you're right. 50%. So it's the same idea, right? Half right, half incorrect. So we understand where they are and where they're ready to learn. So what this is telling you in terms of their ZPD level, and it's found in the instructional planning report, is what skills the students are close to mastering. And you get it for 2 key areas, phonological awareness and phonics. And phonemic awareness is a part of phonological awareness too. And then it helps the teacher immediately know, what should I teach right now? Where is this child ready to learn? And this is also criterion reference. And what's beautiful about this as well is that within this report, there are aligned activities based on the child's zone of proximal development. I see you nodding because you probably saw those as well. And it helps to bridge the next step for the educator too, and help them understand, what is appropriate for this student. They probably have a plethora of resources. I've never met a teacher without a file cabinet full of stuff, right? So they probably have that, but just the entryway for them as well is built in. And then hyperlinked in here is going to be a link to the interpretive tables that walks you through all of the different skills within the ZPD levels too. It's only 5. And they're found on 3 places, your benchmark matrix, which we're going to explore, the student report and instructional planning report here. So something that I hear a lot are, how do the ZPD scores relate to the domain scores? And maybe your teachers ask that too. So just so you're aware, they don't relate to one another. So just like Put that out there first and foremost. They're going to inform different decisions in our separate metrics. So your domain score, remember I said resource allocation. Who needs support and where? It's not giving them an instructional next step. It's saying, hey, this child's at the 5th percentile in language comprehension. I should pay attention to that and help bolster that skill. Domain scores can help communicate growth, though, in an entire domain. So imagine how we talk about math growth data. We say child went from X percentile to X percentile. We're able to say that using the domain score too. They went from the 10th to the 50th percentile in that domain. And that's giving us growth in the entire domain, not just one single skill. And then the ZPD levels really support the teachers with understanding, okay, so what's next? What do I do with this student too? The last word we're going to unpack is the Lexile oral reading measure. And this was new to me because I was very much used to I like to say the typical or traditional Lexile that you get from Math Growth that's based on reading comprehension. But in Math Reading Fluency, there's a newer Lexile also from Metametrics. Does anyone want to take a stab at what it does? If Math Reading Fluency is an oral reading assessment, so something a little different. What are kids doing when they're doing oral reading? Gives us a reading level, what they can understand. Love this, love this. Anything else? When we collect a child's oral reading, we collect their rate and their accuracy, right? Well, what's beautiful about this measure is that it actually lets you know how strong a child is at decoding. It's very intuitive and it's very unique to Math Reading Fluency. There's no other assessment that does that tells you the strength of a child's decoding with that Lexile oral reading measure. So what we have done is we considered a few things: the child's rate, their words correct per minute. We considered their accuracy, how many words they're reading correctly. And then we took apart the text to say, well, how difficult is this text really to decode? Because what we know to be true is that while something may be difficult to understand, the words can be simple. I should have a very good literature example here, but just imagine a complex text that has pretty simple decodable words in there. The concept is difficult for the child to understand, but actually reading the word could be simple, and vice versa. A text can be very challenging to decode. It has a lot of multisyllabic words, a lot of complex syntax in there too, but the concept is simple for them to understand. So what you know now is that there's 2 Lexiles for every text. And what it's able to do as an educator is really support that oral reading fluency. We put a lot of weight in oral reading fluency. If a child is able to decode with a sufficient rate and accuracy, that's going to bolster their overall comprehension. Imagine a child who's really, really struggling to pick up the words off the page and they're going sound by sound, letter by letter, and they're spending so much time trying to figure out the words. Are they even paying attention to what it's about? No, their brain energy is spent somewhere else. So we keep an eye on fluency because that does impact their overall comprehension. So in that, when we think about how fluency impacts comprehension, think about Math Growth. If that is a large breadth of reading comprehension and we had kids in that lower percentile, in that red and that orange maybe too, those are students that we need to know more about. Because if they're struggling to comprehend those passages in Math Growth reading, we might want to dig into their oral reading skills too. Have them read aloud, have them do Math Reading Fluency. And then we have a range for what students can expect when they are looking at their text in class too. So I'll show you what that range is, but when you look at that range, that's a typical readability of text within that grade. So like their science book, their social studies book, it's going to cause them to decode at this level. So are they within that range? Can they access a grade level text? And it's found on 2 places here, the benchmark matrix and student report too. And you'll have hyperlinks like a FAQ to kind of walk you through some of this as well. It took me a while to wrap my mind around it. So this is just a visual of what I just said because I get too excited and I know I have slides to help me talk. But in front of you is really kind of explaining how that Lexile or reading measure is produced. And we unpacked this here too, where we talked about, okay, laser, okay, here we go. The text or readability, how difficult the text is to actually decode, how the child is performing, and then on the individual report is where you'll get that oral reading measure. So my map growth and map reading fluency users, and I asked this too, well, wait a minute, they have two different Lexiles when I look at their reports. We know map growth reading produces that Lexile, and they have one range there. And then when I look at their map reading fluency, it's completely different. That is typical. That could happen. But what's beautiful about that is you know how to spend that student's time. Our time as educators is precious, and so are our students too. In this scenario here, I have a kid with a traditional reading comprehension Lexile at 600, but their oral reading Lexile is a little higher at 700. I would say this child is pretty good at what? If their oral reading Lexile is higher. Yep, this child is your word caller. They can say all the words, but they may need a little bit more support with language comprehension. They may need more support with morphology, understanding those inflectional endings and how they change the meaning of words too. We may need to spend more time supporting background knowledge. Is the volume turned up in social studies, or are their heads down in the back of the classroom? Are they really supporting that overall background knowledge in both science and social studies? We need to kind of focus on that. We're not spending time on a fluency intervention for this kid. She's doing all right. Same scenario for this student too. Okay. Has anyone attended the office hours that we host once a month? Catherine's been there.
I've been there.
Listen, office hours, I don't want to take up all your time, but please consider joining office hours. It is a complimentary. It's part of your partnership with us where we kind of talk through some of these things together too. You ask your questions. You're amongst your colleagues in the state of Kentucky too. It's just very specific to us here. And you're joined by your Kentucky team. And something that we talked about are the test options in map reading fluency together. I love this picture because, I mean, we're all here for them, right? But this picture really is to illustrate when you're thinking about the test options in map reading fluency, we have a default test, adaptive oral reading, but really think about where the kids are grade-wise, season-wise, and also the data that you need to. So just really quick, adaptive oral reading default. If you don't do anything to the map reading fluency assignments, all kids are taking this test in K-3. They're either being routed to oral reading or foundational skills based on their sentence reading. But you may just want oral reading data for students. So you assign the passages only test form to them. They just do all oral reading. They won't route into foundational skills. Fourth graders, fifth graders are taking this test form if you don't do anything about it. They're doing this one automatically. That's oral reading passages. Foundational skills, your younger students, emergent readers, students who are not reading connected text just yet. They take this test form, generally in kindergarten, early first grade, where they're assessed in those decoding and language comprehension domains. Beginner test. Anyone have pre-K littles running around their school or actually walking in a line in school? They're not running around in school at all. No pre-K. But even if you don't have pre-K, there's some students who walk through your door who may not have concepts of print, who are very early in their reading journey. I mean, it happens in kindergarten, first grade. Sometimes you get a second grader who you're wondering, have you ever seen a book before? Sometimes they have, sometimes they haven't. You can give out this test form. You wouldn't necessarily give it all year, really beginning of the school year. And the reason being is that the content caps at a certain point. They don't do those more advanced phonics skills. They do more like letters, letter sounds, initial sounds at most in this test form. Would it be helpful to give you videos of these test forms so you can also see them? They're fun videos. It's watching myself and my colleague get all the answers wrong because we're focused on recording and not the questions, but just, I promise we're smarter than a pre-K student. I promise we are. We got this. Progress monitoring is in 3 areas. And progress monitoring is something that I do plan on unpacking in our next office hours that we're having in October. It'll be October 22nd, 2:00 Central, 3 Eastern. And I want to talk to you all about goal setting and progress monitoring. Are we starting to see kids meet those middle of the year expectations? Are they on track? Are they off track? We want to know now before the end of the school year and how to leverage this data. Hope I got that time and date right, Catherine. Maybe October 22nd. Okay.
I'll check.
Okay.
I know the time frame.
Yeah. It's like on a Tuesday. So there's progress monitoring the foundational skills, and then there's a dyslexia screener that's used a lot. And it's for K-3 students. If ever you try to assign it to a 4th grader, you won't be able to. But you can assign the foundational skills test to a 4th grader. Okay. And then inclusive rate measure. So that's what's in your toolbox. And that's what we talked about in office hours. And we talked to them about, what does the test forms typically look like based on NWEA's recommendations too. So really foundational skills early on and switching over to the adaptive oral reading for older students. Now, remember, these are our recommendations, but automatically assigned to your students is the adaptive oral reading. So if you didn't touch it, all kids are doing adaptive oral reading in K-3, which isn't going to hurt them. The adaptive oral reading K-3 test, this is the measure that moves them into oral reading or into foundational skills. When you think about reading fluency, the entry point of fluency is like letter naming, letter sounds, and then it progresses to like chunks and words and sentences and eventually to text. So in order to make sure that students are not exposed to a text they really aren't ready, we do a little litmus test, a pre-test of sentence reading fluency for K-3 students. And if they're successful here with the sentence reading, in the sentence reading measure, they're like really 1st grade sentences. A lot of the words that they're going to see in 1st grade is based on this measure here, and they're not super complex. For example, in terms of inflectional endings, it's going to have like S, ing maybe, but nothing too drastic. But if they have, and I'm sorry, you can't see that, but if they're successful with that, they have at least 15 sentences correct with 75% accuracy on the sentence reading, they're able to go over into the oral reading track. So what you will notice is that when you're looking at your benchmark matrix, especially in K-3, you may have some students with oral reading data, but then you may have some students here with foundational skills data. The test did what it's supposed to do. We don't want to put kids in passages if they're not ready. That is traumatizing for some students. So these students who weren't ready for that, they came down into foundational skills. You can see they have like those lower sentence reading scores here. They're also below expectations. And the kids made it over here to oral reading. Now, just because you made it to oral reading doesn't mean you're going to be the bee's knees. You may need a little bit support there too. But what we do know is that your sentence reading was sufficient enough to go over into that track. But again, if you just want to assign foundational skills data, you want your data to live to the left, you can just do that too. But this is to be expected if they take the adaptive oral reading. If they take adaptive oral reading 4+, remember, they're not going to adapt to foundational skills. They're going to have a little warm-up, graphic novel. They will do sentence reading though. And then they're just going to go straight into the oral reading path. Start with their first passage, go to their second and third passage, and it will get harder based on their comprehension questions. So if they have 5 out of 6 correct, then they'll see a harder text. If they don't, then they'll see an easier text. They'll still adapt based on how they're responding. But do know that really the data is tied to the assessment that you provide or the routing of the student to. So if you want foundational skills data, assign foundational skills test. If you want oral reading data, assign that, or know they're going to route accordingly based on sentence reading and K-3. All right. So office hours was an hour, and you did that in like 6 minutes. So come to office hours, guys. Come to office hours. Fly away. Had to make sure you're still awake. Had to make sure you were still awake and didn't leave me. Yeah, so you should be receiving an invite from my talented colleagues, and we send it out how far in advance?
So for this group, we have a flyer. So in the follow-up resources that we share with Mary, we'll share these slides, but we'll also share a PDF. So even our online people can get the link, but you can register there. You can read through what we still have 2 more left, one in October, one in November, and then you'll receive a calendar invite for you to join.
Yeah, I think they're pretty nice. We have a pretty good turnout.
Great chance to ask questions.
Yes, yes, yes. So has anyone seen the no score for their oral reading? Yeah, no score, not fun, but it can happen. It can happen. And we talked about this, I believe, in the August office hours too. But when you see the no score, remember the data populates every 24 hours. So 24 hours later, this is in the teacher's dashboard, the no score. They'll also see insufficient data on their screener outcomes report too. But when you see the no score, I always say, okay, start by looking at their literal comprehension scores. Getting some indication of what happened. But when we look at this initial student, the student is comprehending. So maybe, just maybe, they were reading too silently, too quietly, or there could have been just a lot of background noise in general too. Like sometimes the kids were just reading their head and not aloud. I used to use map reading fluency with my teachers. I had a teacher that had like a little voice tone problem, if you know what I mean. And I would hear her, talking to students quite loudly while the kids were taking a test too. Be careful with the microphone, guys. Be careful. Then there's a student here who is not comprehending. Different experience. Maybe they did not read enough of the passage. But you don't have to play the guessing game in general. But this is some indication to say, hey, look here, start to see what could have happened. What they're actually able to, and I think I skipped a slide by accident, but I'll make sure when we go into the reports to show you, when they click on the student's name, they can click into the words needs review. When they click into needs review, this is what comes up. And they'll see the recording, they'll see the passage that they were asked to read, and then they're also going to see this. Why is this no score? When they click into there, it tells them 2 things. 1, they didn't read enough of the passage. If they don't read at least 75% of the passage, we're not providing a score. So reason being is that because we have more than a retell for our comprehension questions, it's more than just a basic retell. They're tightly aligned to the passage that the child read. We want them to read enough of the passage. So they don't read enough, then it's a no score. And then the other piece is if there was just too much background noise too. During office hours, we did kind of unpack some of the things you can do. And I had this up for you as well to kind of help with the scoring for background noise and things like that too. Usually I have a few questions about the no score, but maybe I'm just 1 to 2 steps ahead with mitigating that. So what does it look like to make sure we don't have a lot of no scores? Links for you will be first that student experience video. If you met Ashley, you know she loves that video. I play it almost every day because it really helps. It can help students, it can help parents, it can help teachers really know what does this actually look like for a testing environment. Make sure they have time to practice, do the mic check for the students, equipment check for the educators. And then also linked in here are just a few like testing prep checklists, administration guidance links in here too, and troubleshooting guide as well that we want to equip teachers with. And practice tests. You can never practice too many times. Okay. So what I want to do is let you see that little gif of the ants marching one by one, hurrah, hurrah. But also spend some time looking at our reports together because we're like at 32. And we may not get to all of them. That's okay. But let's dig in. So maybe it's helpful now for you to go ahead and pull out your laptops and tell me, would you rather, and this is like, you're not going to hurt anyone's feelings. Do you want to look at your map growth reports first or look at your map reading fluency reports or a combo? Because I know you don't have map reading fluency reports to look at, right? Yeah, we can differentiate support. It's fine.
For people that just want to look at map growth reports, we can grab a table and come over here.
Let me know.
Or if anyone has specific questions about map, like if there is a specific map reading fluency report up there that you want Ashley to kind of dig in more so. We're here for y'all.
I know.
If anybody just wants to look at map growth, if you're at a campus or a district that's not using map reading fluency and you want to come over here to this table with me, we can have a map growth party over here.
Map growth party sounds fun. I might join that one too.
I'm gonna party hop.
Party hop. Okay. People. Okay. As promised, I'm going to look at some map reading fluency reports up here. And I'm going to change my view here to school administrator, just so I can see my data. Because notice if you're a district administrator, you're not going to have access to all the reports. You're going to have just a few of them. So if you just adjust your role, you'll be able to look at some of the fun reports I'm going to show you as well. And I won't be in middle school. I'm talking about elementary. And I won't be in pre-K. I will start here. So this was the BM benchmark matrix report that you wrote down initially that we want teachers to look at. And to be honest with you, when they log in, they're going to go to this report. It is probably very eye-catching to them. It fosters a lot of questions about, well, why are some of my students here on the right with oral reading data? Why are some of them on the left here with foundational skills data? And we talked about that. We talked about how the sentence reading fluency will move students over to either side of the assessment if they're a K-3 student too. This is a great example here. I mentioned to you, I did not lie to you, that you could see no expectation in the fall of first grade. There are no oral reading rate norms in fall of first grade. Hasbrook and Tyndall doesn't start till the middle of the school year. But we are excited that there's a child that made it to oral reading this early in the school year. That's wonderful. It really is wonderful. This report can be sorted. So if they want to see students from highest to lowest in some of these domains they're thinking about, maybe phonological awareness, they're able to sort this report and look at the data in multiple ways. They're really going to want to play with this report and start to unpack the why. Remember the performance levels we talked about first? These color codes are those performance levels. B for below, yellow, A for approaching. They're not reading levels. Green, M here for meeting, blue, E for exceeding. And in case you forget, this drop down is going to be right here for you as well. No score, no expectation. So if you were to walk into this classroom, let's just say you walk into this classroom and they're doing a lesson on CVC words. Say it's the fall of first grade, like the first or 2 weeks, right? Are the students in front of you ready to learn CVC words? They're tier 1 content. See some yellows, I see some reds. Do they look like they're ready to go? I see the shaking of the head. No, not yet, not yet. While they are going to receive access to that content, because all kids get tier 1, there's going to be clear indication that some students need additional scaffolding. So as like a leader, building leader, district leader, instructional coach too, I may be looking to see what are some of those differentiated tools or strategies that teacher is going to do for these students specifically. Because I know if a child is ready to learn letters and sounds and phonics, they have a few pre-skills in order to access actually reading a CVC word like cat, dog, or other ham CVC words too. I want to take a look at this report and just switch over really quick to 3rd grade. And the reason why I'm going to 3rd grade, I'm not trying to shy away from 4th grade, guys. You know, the sandbox is fun, but the sandbox is not complete. I don't have data in all the grades too. It's probably about as high as I can go with reliable information in front of you. But just so you know too, here is all reading data here in 3rd grade. So I'll give you a moment to kind of absorb this as well. It looks like here that these students probably took passages only because a few of them should not have made it over into oral reading if they took adaptive oral reading, looking at their sentence reading scores. But take a moment to see here. We have a little spread of students and their rate and accuracy abilities. And, you know, a question that I often have is, okay, so these students who are below, do I just give them the foundational skills test? Well, you know, that's a big question. And there is a use case where you might want to give the foundational skills test to students who are really, really struggling. Now, when you're looking at this information, while they have lower accuracy scores and lower rate scores too, there is a lot of information in their running record. Remember, you have a recording. And teachers typically have a skill set to listen into a child's reading. When you click review audio, you're going to have real data again. You know, you're not going to see that message up there. But you're able to hit play. And they're able to really determine what are some trends that they're noticing in that child's oral reading. What's really tripping them up? Mm-hmm. How do they do it?
There's other kids in the room that
Yes.
can hear their head rate at the same time they are.
So every child has a headset with a microphone. Nope, and they're like spaced apart, like I say adults linked arm apart too. And they have like noise canceling headsets too. And they're likely getting different passages as well. But I always say practice, 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 because it is new. I gave one-on-one, one-to-one need testing to students, and then I gave map reading fluency. And I forgot the headphones the first time. That worm was just like all over the room. Every kindergartner was ready. And I said, you know what? I'm not ready. We're doing this tomorrow. Like, no, no. And it was like post-pandemic. Like it was 2021, guys. Great stories. But yeah, so they read into the microphone and it's scored for them. Imagine like Siri is scoring their speech too. And Siri does adjust to different dialects and accents as well, like she learns. Mhm. Yes. Yeah. No. Did you listen to that?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I taught in Houston, Texas, and 99.9% of my students were not native English speakers. And the majority of them had accents, and it picks up the majority of accents. Now, you do have the ability to hand score if you have a student with a severe speech impediment or a severe dialect, where sometimes it's even hard for you to understand them sometimes. But that reading fluency does do a really good job of picking up, because it was trained with students who do have speech impediments, or trained with students that do have dialects or accents or things like that.
Yes.
In our position, we don't give those tests, but we analyze it to identify.
Yeah, you should.
Windows to see how, because you get to see the what, but to see the how, it helps.
But yeah, I always tell teachers to start here first. Start here with this running record. They're used to doing that analysis to say, well, what is that trend? Is it like the long O sound they're getting tripped up with? Or is it long I? Or is it inflectional endings too? Like, what is the trend that's really holding them back before we say, okay, let's just give them the foundational skills test first? In the case where they're just really struggling to get through the passage, because there's some kids who really are our emergent readers and they're in your 4th and 5th grade classrooms too, then you may want to give that foundational skills test as well. But if you have some data already in the all reading, I always say start there. Start there. Speak to. Yeah, so that's a great question. So we have actually the ability to roster through grade 8 for that reason, because we know that there's some students who are still learning to read in those upper grades, and that's just the reality of what we have in front of us, and we're happy to support them too. So instead of giving them the oral reading assessment, if it's more appropriate, you can assign them the foundational skills test too. And what's even great is that for the progress monitoring, you can adjust the Lexile difficulty. So if you want them within that kindergarten range, you can assign them the progress monitoring there. Or if you just need oral reading data and they don't have the stamina to get through the full benchmark test in about 25 minutes or so, then we'll assign them just one passage just to see where they are and go from there. Great question. Okay. Don't let Ashley go on and on about the data, because she'll go down a rabbit hole and we'll miss lunch, but it's all good. For your reading plans, don't forget, in every individual report is this profile and next steps. Please leverage this. Now, teachers are practitioners. They have a lot of information surrounding students as well. But literally with one click, I click into the profile next step, and this could be used as an initial goal for a student too. You may bring in other data points as well, but literally right here built in is a goal that you can produce for that student too. And I'll show you how I got there really quick again. So this is the individual student report, profile and next steps. One for comprehension, and then here, helping with their decoding accuracy as well. This could be something that you leverage to build your reading plans too. And I will tell you that partners get as specific as they want them to grow this skill set to that skill set, or this CPD level to that one too, or they get just general goals as well. But you have a lot of support to help you. I'm going to switch gears momentarily. I'm going to come back to 1st grade. And I want to actually show you an individual student report as well for first grade. This is my student. I always pick Nicholas Bowman. Not because he's meeting, but because he has progress monitoring data. But what I want you, this is all great information here too. Remember, we saw this in the benchmark matrix. We talked about profile next steps, these hyperlinks in here. But when your teachers get really curious about a test event, like they get really curious, okay, so what happened? What did they do? They're likely going to look at the bottom of the individual student report. And here is where you get some insight into what they experienced during that test event. So in general, students start at the middle of the continuum in foundational skills. They start here at blending and segmenting and phonological awareness. And then in phonics, they start a little bit earlier at building words with one letter. So what you're going to notice is that every single skill is not filled in. That's intentional. Because for a student who, let's just say, is at these higher areas, phonemic manipulation, like this student actually reached a higher area too, why start them here at counting syllables? They're probably pretty good with counting syllables if they're able to actually blend phonemes. But we did actually find that they were struggling with that, then it'll adapt as far down as it needs to go to find their zone of proximal development. Same idea here for phonics too. They started with building words with one letter, did pretty okay, 6 out of 9. That's about 66%. And remember, we're looking for a ZPD, about 50, in order to move them over. And look at this. Decodable CVC was pretty good. Encoding, so that's reading and spelling. They were able to go over here to single syllable words, but it got a little shaky there. 5 out of 11, 4 out of 9. Got a little shaky. So this is where it's appropriate to support that student too. Now, this is not saying that we're going to forget these earlier skills here. We're going to want to reinforce some of these skills because it's going to support them with building those more difficult skills as well. But if I'm trying to introduce single syllable words, they're going to need more support. This is where they're ready to learn. I'm not saying they mastered it because they're green, but because they're green. I'm saying that this is where they're ready to learn their zone of proximal development. And it's green because where they're ready to learn is appropriate for this season and this grade. They're meeting. And then let's find another student who early on, this student received a flag. This student is at the lower areas here in language comprehension and in phonological awareness and in phonics too. But see here, he was given the blending phonemes, didn't do so well with that. While he had 2 out of 2 correct, out of, I just clicked the little tooltip, it just said in 1 minute, he only got through 2 blending tasks. That's not a lot to do in 60 seconds. So he was actually bumped back into initial sounds and then bumped back again here to count syllables. So we know we want to secure these earlier skills before we move him over into the higher skills too. Okay. I said a lot, but don't forget too, your teachers have access to these little hyperlinks in here. These ZPD instructional recommendations that can literally be printed off right from the individual student report. Send them home to families. When they're going through a conference with their child and they're talking about some of their reading data too, here is one thing that you can do at home to help your child grow with me. They may not know all the ins and outs of phonological awareness, but there are some steps they can follow. It'll be great to share with them too. Of course, it's not a curriculum for students, but it's an activity based on where they're ready to learn. And you get that for phonological awareness and phonics. Okay. If NWEA isn't my favorite assessment company, I'll tell you, when they had this report come out, I was so excited because back in the day, we had to just sort from the benchmark matrix like this or export the data. But now we actually have our kids in groups for us. Sometimes putting your kids in groups almost feels like the Olympics a little bit, or like, I don't know, like picking kids for kickball or something, like, who goes where with what, or even better, class lists. Like, oh my gosh, those are fun to make. But here you are, kids in groups for you based on where they're ready to learn in both phonological awareness and in phonics. And I love this report because of the simplicity around, hey, who's ready to learn these skills? Who are the students and what are they ready to go and do? Who's not on their way and what are we doing about these students too? At a high level, I can identify these students. Teachers have access to this too, but of course, school administrators can as well. And then activities built in here as well for them to access. For both phonological awareness and then phonics is here towards the middle as well too. So it kind of hits the easy button for teachers. They could use the easy button every now and then when we can. Their kids are already in groups for you where they're ready to go. And then they're broken down by percentiles down here in language comprehension. Okay. Would you believe we talked about 4 reports together today? We did instructional planning. We did the benchmark matrix. The BM report, I said this is always the first one they're going to see. And then we briefly looked at individual student reports for oral reading. And we looked at it for foundational skills as well. Now, when you come to office hours, I told you I will definitely go over progress monitoring as well in October. But know that part of our partnership is also doing data meetings with you. So it's always great for me to show my sandbox data, but I also love being intentional with your time and looking at your students with you too, and making sure you're understanding what your data story is and how we're going to move students forward as well. Okay. So I'm going to pause there and just kind of do a check-in to see what questions you have maybe in your inbox right now from an educator about MAP growth, MAP reading fluency, literacy, fall festival. I can't answer those questions, but if you invite me, I will be there. I would love to join the fall fest. Yeah.
Is 92nd percentile the lowest distinguished? That all?
For what subject or in general?
Different for each subject.
Yeah. So when you're looking at the linking studies, it's different for like each subject, each grade. And of course, also each state as well. So, it just depends on the subject and the state and the grade.
I asked if we get a lot of teachers that are confused because they think that it's distinguished, they should be nominated for getting counted. But if it's 92nd percentile, that's not 96. So we have to tell them because it's distinguished, but I think they have that.
Yeah. What do you think about that, Catherine and Sarah?
Sorry, what was the question? I just walked in. I'm standing right.
Distinguished 92nd. I'll let you ask your question.
Well,
I just-
we get a lot of teachers that they all want to nominate a kid that's distinguished on the math test, but some of them go down to 92nd percentile or distinguished. We have to have 96 before we get down to. I was wondering what the cutoff was. Like, is 92nd as low as it goes for distinguished, or is it different per subject?
I would have to pull up the linking studies. That's something I'll do with you. We can pull up this actual linking study tables because it's going to be different for reading versus math. And it's going to be different grade by grade because it's not just like, hey, one cutoff score. So you'll see for math, it typically.
Population.
Yeah, so we'll have to look at the actual linking study tables to see because it very well is probably different for one grade versus another.
Yeah, I answered that. Kind of okay. What other questions do you have? Appreciate that. Keeping me on my toes this morning. Is there anything that you're maybe excited to bring back to an educator or a building leader or to another colleague that we talked about today. And if you tell them that we brought like really great muffins and stuff like that too, that's fine. That any like newfound learning or aha moments or, yep, that makes sense. Yeah, because it's not a mastery test. And I didn't realize that either. So think about when students are taking the test. We don't want them to spend 2 hours doing it because there are going to be some items that they're not going to know just yet. It's okay. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep, absolutely. 43 questions. Hopefully they're not taking 2 hours, but we have those like 92nd percentile students who want everything correct, and that's just not how it's designed.
I think one of the things we figured out is there was something in the rating plans on those students at 50% and below.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of been looking at, our tier 2 kids, like the 11th percentile to 59, tier 3, and more than
Mhm.
So I think we're going to change that to a 30th percentile, but probably using some of the resources that district like that.
Yeah, it's tough. It's so tough though, because you want to make sure you get the right kids. But yeah, so and we have districts that use different cut points for those reading plans too. Like it's a 30 percentile is like our general recommendation for map growth, and you assign the map reading fluency. But then there's other districts that will kind of pull it towards the 40th, 50th, or look at some of those Lincoln studies too.
Well, we've been doing some work with an organization called Kentucky Avery, and that's where they noticed consider that 50% below.
Are you familiar with that organization?
Because if you're looking at the 50th percentile or below, then that's an average score or below average, right? So something else that might be interesting is to also pair that with the KSA projections. So looking at the map growth data, but also pairing it with the KSA projections to see which proficiency bucket that's going to plop them into, right? Because distinguished is, we were looking it up. And we can pull up those linking studies to look deeper, but if that makes sense for you all, then you can pull it up. And giving map reading fluency to students is never going to hurt them, right? Even if it's a student that's at the 50th percentile, having map reading fluency data is not going to hurt them. After having that data, you may notice, hey, this student is actually doing okay. We might not need to put them in tier 2 or tier 3. Maybe tier 1 will meet their needs if we do a little bit of scaffolding, right? It's not a one size fits all approach. Our jobs would be easier if there was a magic answer, like a perfect button for everyone. It really is a big, it depends. I don't know did that help answer your question? Some?
Well, start with it'll make life easier, because we know if you go 50% on below, we've got too many students.
It's a lot of kids, exactly. And when you're thinking about that number, that cutoff number, right? It depends on how many students you have beneath the 30th percentile. If 75% of your student population is underneath the 30th percentile, then that does not make sense. It's not feasible to have a reading plan for all of those students. You cannot put all of those kiddos within tier 2 and tier 3, right? Sometimes we work with districts where it might be campus to campus. Like we pulled up that district profile and we saw one campus was rocking it. Another campus was a lot lower. So that number would not necessarily make sense campus to campus. So that's where you can pull in those local norms to see which students need this extra support. And then you can use map reading fluency to determine what extra supports they need. Great question.
Yeah, I love the ahas too. The biggest aha was MAP stands for something, measures of academic progress. Yes.
And I do just have another question for you all. How many of y'all signed up to stay for the afternoon session? So for the afternoon session, it might be, well, just a thought. Would it be more helpful if we really kind of use that time to kind of thought partner with data, or are y'all wanting to see an overview of this is everything macro is and does, and this is everything macro fluency is and does? What would be the most helpful for you all?
We didn't have spring computers.
Okay.
We can't access our data.
No, you
Okay.
can't. Oh, your phone.
Do you want to use my computer to log into your account, or use one of our computers to log into your account? Would that be helpful, or?
It's not accepted my,
Okay.
I thought it said.
Okay. There we go.
Okay.
See, like, I don't know my password. Okay, we'll figure it out. But in the meantime, just to make sure we're aligning with time, there is some lunch out there. There's some sandwiches, chips, cookies. We have leftover muffins for this morning too, so feel free to have some more muffins. The pumpkin ones really are really good. The pumpkin. Yes. I saw it and I'm a pumpkin person. I'm just like, it's fall.
It's fall.
It's fully on. I was like,
Yeah.
get my pumpkin strudel muffins. But help yourselves to some lunch. We'll be here to answer some questions. And we'll be here to talk through any data, and we'll figure out how we want to use that afternoon time. So I want to make sure that this is the most valuable for you.
Oh, we're here together.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
All right. Hands in. We got this. Yay.
But, and if y'all have more questions and you want to dive into it right now, we're happy to too. I just don't want you to be like, all right, I have to leave here at 11 to get back here at XYZ time. So we're here for it.
I will, fill out or send out the feedback form in the email to you all. Are you all, is everybody staying for that? So I'm gonna send that out for the morning, but it should be 2 ELA hours to stay for the morning and then 4 to stay for the. All of it.
What time of afternoon?
It goes from 11:30. And what time Mary had.
If you read or not, we when we're using the microphone, we want this button to be red. Okay, it's on.
Okay. All right. Mhm. There you go. Okay. So to my Zoomies, hello again. Ashley Patterson here. I want to make sure, you know what? They probably can't see what's on my screen because we switched computers.
Let me forward you the email that you can log in and share your screen. I didn't even think about that.
When I looked up and I saw that little bar wasn't there. Sorry about that. We'll show you in a moment.
Forwarded you the email.
Okay. Okay.
Just got a question in the chat from an online person, targeted specifically what you're gonna talk about.
Okay.
Where not pretty to get to data that we'll need to use for improvement.
All right. That is a great and timely question. Great and timely question. Okay. So I'm gonna minimize that. All right. So when you're thinking about reading plans for students and you're trying to identify those components of students who are not meeting the grade level benchmarks, this is where you're going to leverage this benchmark matrix report that's in front of you. So remember, one of the key terms that we talked about together today were the performance levels. Those performance levels are letting you know where they are in relation to grade and seasonal expectations. So the KDE has identified those same big 5 areas in early literacy to determine at risk, right? So they named out like comprehension, vocabulary, phonological awareness, phonics, fluency. Now, I wanted you to keep in mind that oral reading fluency or rate is not going to be assessed for every student. It's only for students who have an oral reading assessment or routed into oral reading. And then when you think about comprehension, generally that's defined by text comprehension. So they're actually reading a passage and answering questions aligned to that passage. But there's a foundational component of listening comprehension for some of our earliest learners that's aligned to those standards in the early grades too. So I just wanted to call that out too, that the sentence reading fluency measure can be considered more of a foundational fluency measure, but generally that's defined as oral reading rate.
Actually, I'm so sorry. They
Yeah.
say they can't see your screen.
They can't see my screen. Oh.
Jana can see it, and she's on the Zoom. Okay.
Megan, can you see now?
Is it showing the report for her? Hopefully. Okay.
Yeah, Jana can see the.
She's looking at this?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yep. Yeah, Jana
Okay.
can see it. So it must be a
Connection or. Okay. Sorry about that. So when we're looking at those at-risk indicators, we're thinking about those performance levels. Is a child below the grade level expectation? Are they approaching the grade level expectation, meeting or exceeding 2 in these specific domains? So when you're trying to determine if they're at risk, you start by looking at this benchmark matrix report and let the colors help you tell that story. Almost like how we were talking about with map growth, using those colors to help you. Use the colors to help guide that decision-making as well. And what you may find is that there may be a deficit across the board for a student. There may be red across or yellow across too. then that's where we can use other data points to really determine what is the place for meaningful growth of that student as well. So one important thing to pair this benchmark matrix report with, because the question starts to become now, well, what is the threshold for a child to be meeting in language comprehension over here, right? Because I'm starting to make goals and I want them to go from below to approaching or below to meeting in certain areas too. What does that look like? Whenever you are in a map reading fluency report, at the very, very top, close to home, is this help button right up here. And the help button is helpful for many reasons. One, is going to give you more information on the report that you're looking at. So if you forget what Ashley says today about these reports you're looking at, you have some insight to what it's showing you here too. But what I do want you to know and hold on to are these handy dandy interpretive tables. So on the right-hand side where it says map reading fluency reports, second to last option here are your interpretive tables. And if there's something that you might want to consider to be your map reading fluency Bible, it's probably this. This is what's going to help you really understand what domains are being assessed and what are those thresholds to meet the grade level expectations too. Now, interpretive tables are printer friendly. So if you click that first hyperlink, it allows you to get a PDF. You want to save that or print that out. Ashley Patterson's not telling you to print 50 pages in color, but if you can, that's great. If you can't, you'll still get the gist of it. And you also want to bookmark this as well, because you're going to use this, especially as you're starting to learn more about the data that's in front of you. So earlier I mentioned, I'm just switching back really quick, that you see in here next to the performance level, this child is below the grade level expectations and phonological awareness. And their ZPD level is rhymes and syllables. This is where they're ready to learn. Their ZPD level here is letters and sounds. But where does that look within the full progression of skills? Where does that fall in? That's where my interpretive tables come in. So these hyperlinks will bring you to that page directly. But right here in front of you is the phonological awareness table. So here, ZPD level 0 all the way through 5. And 0 means that they are very, very early in their journey for reading. 5 is the highest. And that's typically where we want students to end on their foundational skills journey. So if you have a kid working in foundational skills, you want them to achieve that level 5. And 0 to 5 is the same for phonological awareness and phonics here. Remember, when I was showing you an individual student, I said, oh, in phonological awareness, they're ready to learn rhymes and syllables. Where does that fall within this progression? Rhymes and syllables is considered a 0 and a 1. But in terms of what decides if they're the 0 or the 1, this is pretty much if they got everything incorrect, they're a 0. So like when I say very early, they didn't get any items correct at all. 1, they got a few of those rhyming, whether it's completion or counting syllables correct. But if they didn't get anything right at all, they'll be at a 0. And these are the measures associated with the ZPD levels too. And you can see that they're progress in a linear way. So like, rhyming is very beginner in phonological awareness. It's like the very entry point. And substitution is that highest skill in phonological awareness to phoneme substitution. And you look at this table very similarly for phonics and word recognition. Letters and sounds is that very early introduction into phonics. And then the highest area that we assess right now is decodable single syllable words. And the highest skill associated with that is this is the encoding side of single syllable words. So being able to just not just read them, but spell them as well. So if you need to know, well, is the child a 0? Are they a 1, 2? That information specifically is found in their individual student report. It will give you a little hint here. Under decoding, Dennis is working at rhymes and syllable level 1. Level 1 for phonics and word recognition here in that parentheses. So I know they're not actually at the 0, which is a more positive sign about where they are. So when you're considering, well, where is level 1 in relation to this child's grade? So this child is in 1st grade. It's the fall, and they took the foundational skills test too. How far below is that child in terms of grade and seasonal expectations? I'm coming back into my interpretive tables here, and you will have a hyperlink to the interpretive tables in the slide deck that I share. We have this foundational skills table here that pulls in the performance levels and the grade level expectations. So those color codes, and also what are those expectations here. So when we look at this chart, it's pulling together both phonological awareness and phonics together. Remember, they both had levels 0 through 5. So we can collapse that table together. These are those performance levels. We know that below are students that we may be targeting for being at risk. Approaching could be at risk as well. When you look at this chart, it's organized by grade and season. So pre-K starts here, kindergarten, and I might zoom out just a little bit. Sorry to my zoomies. I'm gonna make this a little small, but I'll zoom it back in again. 1st grade, 2nd grade, and then 3rd grade and above is lumped together. To the left-hand side are the terms, fall, winter, and spring. Remember, the expectation is going to grow as the child grows during the school year as well. So for that student who was at a level 1 in the fall of 1st grade, they're considered below expectations. My student that I was just looking at, they were at a 1 in phonological awareness, they were at a 1 in phonics, and a level 1 here puts them at below. In the winter, if they stay at the 1, they're going to continue to be below the grade level expectations. From fall, in order for them to meet expectations, they had to be at a level 3. Notice, where do we want kids leaving kindergarten in the spring? At a level 3. So this student is at a level 1, which is actually where I want my fall kindergartner students to be. So if I have a 1st grader at a level 1, and I wanted them to be there at the beginning of kindergarten, letters and sounds, we may consider this child 1 year below the grade level expectation because of where they're ready to learn. So I want this child to kind of grow at a faster rate too. We wanted them here, and they came in here. Now notice that that threshold to meet is going to continue to grow. So let's say in the fall, I get them up to the level 2. If they stay at that level 2 in the winter, when I do MOY testing, they did grow a ZPD level, but they're still going to be below expectations. It's not going to put them in the green. It's not going to put them in the green in the winter until they're at a level 4. And at the end of the school year, level 5 is the expectation for them to be meeting. Now, keep in mind, when you want to know, well, what is a level 3? What's a level 4? What's a level 5? That's where this table comes into. So level 3 in phonics here is decoding CVC words, decoding and encoding. okay. Usually I have questions about the interpretive tables, foundational skills tables. But hopefully you start to get the gist of how to read this table and how it's going to help you understand where they are in terms of grade and seasonal expectations, and maybe consider how to goal set for that student too. Because what we just learned here is that if I just wanted them to grow one level, they're still going to be below in the winter. Growth is great, but if we're trying to get them towards, closer and closer towards grade level expectations, we got to move the needle a little bit there too. And then for your second and third graders, in the fall of second grade, technically level 4 is that threshold for approaching here. But that drops off by the winter and spring of second grade. When you think about the skills that we're asking kids to do, all these skills really are at the single word level. But we know in second grade, they have to read beyond the single word level. They have to really be reading beyond the sentence level in order to access that grade level content too. So there isn't an option for a child to be meeting or approaching if they're still in these very early kindergarten skills in the second or even in the third grade too. It's not until they're at the highest areas that they're able to be meeting the grade level expectation in both phonics and phonological awareness. And if you use this last year, this does look a little different because there wasn't a chance to meet in third grade or even second grade winter too. So level 5 now is that threshold to be meeting. So if you have interpretive tables from last year, delete those and get these. And the tables continue to provide you those thresholds too. You just have to be careful looking at this too. Language comprehension, fall, winter, and spring. Something that I like to call out for this table too is thinking about listening comprehension and picture vocabulary. Think about that, in context with the grades that we're supporting. So in kindergarten, all year, we have the option to exceed, meet, approach, or be below expectations. Notice here in first grade, no exceeding and listening comprehension or even picture vocabulary, no exceeding, but they have the option to meet because we do expect that at a certain point, especially in first, second grade, those standards are changing. They still have those standards about with support, but they're starting to really develop more of those independent reading skills too. So they don't have the option to be exceeding in some of these very early language comprehension skills of listening and picture vocabulary. We know that the demands are higher as they go through first grade and as they're in second grade as well and above. But they do have the option to meet expectations here with having at least 12 listening comprehension questions correct. And the same for the vocabulary. They need to have at least 12 correct there too. I'm going to skip through the concepts of print and kind of give you the same discussion around here, sentence reading fluency. And if you notice, this is for fall. The expectation that threshold is going to change by the season, but just looking at fall, and when we saw a few students in kindergarten and the sample data too, I had some kids who were no expectation or exceeding, nothing in the middle. It's fall of kindergarten. Letters and sounds are absolutely appropriate. Kids are reading sentences, that's great too, but we don't have an expectation that they're doing that early. And then notice here too, again, second and third grade, we want them to be reading beyond the sentence level, so they don't have the option to exceed. It's just meet if they have a certain threshold. Now that will adjust as you're looking at the winter time, where now exceeds is 75% or greater in kindergarten versus 50% to be exceeding, but still no expectation in between for meeting, approaching, below. That technically doesn't pick up until kindergarten, where there's a threshold to meet in sentence reading fluency too. But they don't have the option to be below because again, end of kindergarten, they may not be reading sentences just yet. We really want to see that once they get to first grade in the fall. coming on down, be careful when you're looking at the interpretive tables because notice the language changed. So we do offer map reading and fluency in English and in Spanish, and the tables are in here as well. So make sure you're looking at the correct language when you're looking at the tables. But they do try to keep them together, all the Spanish tables, all the English tables too, within that domain. So here is oral reading accuracy, and I'm not going to exhaust you with this table too, but something to notice that's different about this table as they grow in grades is that we don't just want them to have an accuracy of 95%. And 95% is good accuracy because, you know, percentages outside of reading are fine. Like at 80% in math, we're like, okay, that kid's okay, right? 85% in math, they're okay. But if they're only reading 80, 85%, 75% of the words in reading, they're not reading enough to really understand. So we do have a reasonable threshold to meet expectations is if they're reading at least 95% of the words correct. And what's different about the grade level expectations are now the addition of a Lexile. So not only do we want to reward students for having good accuracy, but we want to make sure that they have good accuracy with grade level text too. That's very important, especially if you're looking at this data to see, are they growing? Are we ready to exit them into their general tier 1 classroom without supporting intervention? Is this child now on track to meet some of the proficiencies within math growth too? We want them not just to only have a high accuracy, but also having high accuracy with the text complexity that we know they're going to experience in their grade as well. So just keep that in mind too, if you're wondering, like, for a student who maybe met that threshold in accuracy with 95%, they may not have had the Lexile text complexity associated with it too. And then this morning, I was on a call with the partner today, and they asked me about the oral reading expectations for first grade, and I messed them all the way up. I told them 36 at the end of the school year. I think it's 60 for first grade. I got that wrong. But you know what? You don't have to remember those numbers by heart. They're always here for you too. And use this information to help set fluency goals for students as well. We don't want students in that below range because if their fluency rate is too below, it's going to sacrifice their comprehension. That meets threshold is right here, the earliest entry point to meet versus the highest areas too, which actually correlates to the 50th percentile is meeting for oral reading rate. And remember that will change. So when we're looking at second grade, for example, fall to me is 50. But that needle is going to move to 84 in the winter and then 100 by the end of second grade as well. So this is what we're going to somewhat discuss in our October office hours too about, you know, hey, we're not just looking at fall expectations, because if I'm shooting for 50 in the fall for a kid in second grade, they're not going to be ready for that 84 in the winter. I need to be mindful of that progress as they're going through their oral reading or fluency intervention. Careful, Spanish is in there too. Okay. So while I have this up here too, so hopefully it was clear to use the benchmark matrix to help identify what those performance levels, how to identify areas that may be at risk or not at risk based on the screener data. And then also layering in the interpretive tables to help me see, well, you know, how far below is that child and where should they be if they're going to be meeting the grade level expectation or on their way to what is reasonable. That can be very helpful as you're starting to determine more progress monitoring. So progress monitoring in map reading fluency can be tied to 3 areas. So I'm going to show you through the assignments tab. And your teachers have access to this too, technically. And I'm just going to select a student, Beverly, so I can show you this. Progress monitoring is my second step to select the test form. Right now, it's available in English. And then there's 3 subtypes for progress monitoring: phonological awareness, phonics, word recognition. Now, yes, you can do all 3. Do I recommend you do all 3? Not generally. Not generally. You generally do assign the progress monitoring based on the intervention that you're providing. And it's very rare that you're doing a foundational skills progress monitoring and or reading fluency. It's really like one or the other. Either they're working on these like lower skills here, or they're working on some of those oral reading skills. But do I have partners that assign all 3 without my blessing? Probably, but it's their choice. They have the ability to. They want to get the data. So what I want to show you is that when you assign the oral reading, because this came up when we're thinking about older students too, like students in specialized services and older grades as well, the default assignment for the Lexile text measure is going to be at grade level. However, if we know that there are some students who are not meeting those grade level expectations, right? These are my kids who I'm assigning the diagnostic to. They're likely not meeting grade level expectations. I might want to adjust that. Now, I will tell you that I have some districts, I can't say that they're necessarily in Kentucky, that require on grade level progress monitoring, regardless of the intervention. So if that is a requirement, then that's what you have to follow, but know that you can customize that text level. And if you're like me and you don't understand what these ranges are, what grades they're associated with too, these question marks are always going to be your friend. They're called tooltips and they give you information. So here are the ranges by grade level that students will experience too. So if you know, hey, they're really performing around the 2nd grade range and they're in 5th grade, I want to just assign them that 400 range text versus the 700 if they're just at their grade level. And once I select that band that I want them to experience and I hit assign, they'll be set for progress monitoring. And they will actually access the progress monitoring the same way they do the benchmark test, by clicking take assessment. And once they are assigned, they're going to look like this student here with that orange indicator right here for progress monitoring. And they'll tell you what they're being monitored in for phonological awareness, for example. Now, did anyone use progress monitoring last year for map reading fluency? Okay. So what you may have noticed is that when you logged in for the fall and they took their fall benchmark, they received an auto assignment of progress monitoring. That is likely reflected from the springtime or when they were assigned the progress monitoring. That was not from NWEA. So in the event that you want to like cancel that auto assignment, you just click the little edit button. And I don't have an example of an auto assignment here, but once you edit, you can turn off the auto assignment too. Okay. All right, I'm going to do a quick pause there. We pulled out some of the foundational skills data to help us identify areas of concern for students too. Also took a look at those interpreted tables. I can switch over to oral reading as well, because this is probably where we're looking at for our older students who are in the oral reading path potentially. So I just touched the top of the column there to sort it by rate. And the reason why I sort by rate is because I know that rate is very concerning. If they're not reading sufficiently at a positive rate, then that's going to affect other things too. But in order to grow that rate, I have to grow this accuracy first. There's no point of a kid reading words fast if they're incorrect anyways, right? So we want to really dig into not just their oral reading rate, but their accuracy along with it. What are the components that's really holding them back from being from that 75% to that 95% too? And once we get ideally their rate in check, their accuracy, their rate, that is going to influence their comprehension as well. Let's say I pick a student who is of concern of me. They were below grade level for their oral reading rate. The fall expectation for this third grader is 83, and their highest rate, you can actually scroll down to the test details and results and see. On one passage, they had 75 words correct per minute. On another, they had 73. So that's why they're considered below. They were not at that 83. They weren't in the approaching range either. I know their accuracy wasn't sufficient. Remember, we're looking for 95% with the grade level text, and they didn't quite get there as well. I'm not surprised that their comprehension here is low too. When you look at this information here too, what I want to remind you of is that they're going to see two passages and it's going to adapt. So they initially start with the grade level passage. So let's say they started here with Alpine slides and their comprehension wasn't sufficient. So they saw an easier text. 450 Lexile, this is in that second grade range. And that still was a struggle for that child too. They did a little bit better with the comprehension, but still they didn't have that higher accuracy. And we walk through how to really dig into that reporting and take a look at some of the error analysis in there as well. That's going to be really helpful as you think about how to build out your reading plan. And of course, layering in information is already provided here for you. Randy reads with a good rate. However, his accuracy is not a level to support deeper comprehension. So we're going to focus on accuracy for this student too. And hopefully, once we grow that child's accuracy and their oral reading rate too, we'll see that their oral reading level will also increase, because remember that oral reading level is powered by these two measures here. So the higher the rate, the higher the accuracy, the higher their oral reading level should be. Yeah, that's a great question. So that's a big question, but I will answer it. One, this is pretend data. So that's their piece too. But remember, these texts have two different complexities. This is the Lexile text measure. So this is based on comprehension. And this one is based on the oral reading. So when you're curious to know, well, what was the decodability of the passage? You have to actually go into what's called our technical manual. So when you're really digging through the data, you're really digging through at the, you're just digging through. You're digging through that data. At the very, very end is Appendix A, and I'm gonna make this bigger. This gives you every single passage that is in Map Read and Fluency. There's a few that aren't featured in here because we're adding new passages pretty often, but this gives you 99% of them. And now you see the Lexile text measure next to the oral readability. So here's kind of what I was speaking to a little bit earlier, that this may be difficult to comprehend, but there's some pretty easy words for this child to read in that passage. It's only a readability of a 20. So when you're curious to know, well, how did that 510 go? I will start by always looking at their rate, their accuracy, And then when you want to know the oral readability of the passage, just take a look at the Appendix A in the technical manual, find the passage and look at the text level compared to the decodability of it too. They're not the same. They're not the same lexile. That was a very big question.
That oral reading, the lexile level in terms of traditional lexile comprehension or the lexile oral reading decoding, when you notice which one is higher for a student, that lets you know if they have a strength over the other, right? If they're the same, that means that they're decoding at about the same level that they're comprehending. But let's say that traditional lexile is up here at 800, that lexile oral reading is down here at 600. Do you think you need to work on comprehension with them or decoding with them? The lexile traditional, which is focused on the level of text they can comprehend, 800. Lexile oral reading, 600. You see that where they're lower. So to me, I always like to kind of look at, because you get the traditional lexile level from Math Growth, and you can look at that, compare that lexile oral reading level from Math Reading Fluency, really to kind of see how they're doing. Because me, dyslexic kiddo, I would have been rocking and rolling on that lexile comprehension Math Growth. That could have been in the blue, rocked and roll, but you give me Math Reading Fluency and it's asking me to decode things that I don't know how to decode, and it would look really different, right? So I like looking at both too. That was a really great question. You have an eye for detail. And I think that in a good way.
Yeah. It's not every day I get asked that question, which is why I didn't know the page number. Yeah, I know. And I can make sure you have access to the technical manual too. It's a lengthy document. It's 100 pages, but if ever you do have like a question about map reading fluency and you're like, hey, I need this, I'll let you know what page to take a look at too, so you don't have to, I encourage you to look at it, but this is what we're here for too.
Yeah.
Yep.
The
Mm-hmm.
technical manual or oral reading happens and find it easier.
Absolutely. So every day you could ask that one. What other questions do you have? And I have not been checking the chat thoroughly. Appreciate you. That's why you need a team. If you notice here at the very bottom, field test, that's okay. Every child's third passage is a field test. It's not scored for them too. It's really based on their initial two. And it's always the last passage that they will see too as a field test. It's never the first or the second. Okay. So what are some of your teachers asking in terms of reading plans too that we can help clarify? Oh, the amount of detail. Yeah. That's a better question for our KDE team to describe too. It just really depends, there are some districts that get very, very detailed and there's some districts that won't either. So I would check with them. I think they offer office hours too. The KDE has literacy office hours maybe, but they're pretty responsive in general to see the level of detail that they are looking for. It's tricky because, things can change with the child throughout the school year. Like, what if they meet their goal in 2 weeks? Or what if we notice that, they're struggling to get there? We need to make some adjustments and things like that too. But that would be definitely great to connect with them. Do you happen to work with one of their literacy coaches that they have?
To read the map data and go from there, that they need to go through the actual steps and put in your reading.
Got it.
There's a from KDE, but she works in that area. We can manage your team, Some of the things that I asked them to do, I don't know if you can do it. Some of the things that they ask them, is like the verified problem statement. What's the targeted area of concern? Then they ask them to set a goal and timeline.
You need to know who to go, but map sense. That's what we've been doing with the people.
Yeah, a lot of districts have been doing that. But, you know, there's we can connect you with her. She would be really good to get together with. And look at those reading improvement plans, or I can come over and look at those and see if that would, you know, if that would help. We could sit down as a team and look through those.
When you're talking about the goal that MAP sets, are you talking about MAP growth, that goal, that projection? So I like that. One challenge that I will just tell you, or a challenge or thinking, is that goal is average growth. And that is that growth that students will need in order to maintain their place in space. So if you have a student that starts the year at the 17th percentile, they hit that goal, they might be projected to grow 11 points. They grow 11 points at the end of the year. They maintain their place in space, so they're still on the 17th percentile. That goal is average growth, which will keep them where they are. Now, I think we all can agree that if a student's at the 17th percentile, we don't want them to stay at the 17th percentile forever, right? We might want them to go from the 17th percentile to the 25th percentile. The next year, go from the 25th percentile to the 32nd. So we want to see an upward trend, right? So when you are looking at those MAP goals, it's that maintain their place in space goal for MAP growth. Now, if you want to give them a stretch goal, typically when we think of stretch goals, we want them to be reasonable. So we're thinking about 2 or 3 RIT points more. If their goal for MAP is 11 points, then we might say 13 or 14 to give them a stretch goal so that they can have above average growth, which will lead to an increase in achievement. Now, for some high achieving students, if they are at the 85th percentile, they maintain their place in space, they're going to be okay. They're still in that distinguished bucket, right? But for those lower students, typically those students with atypical performance in the red, the bottom half of the orange, think about 2 to 3 points more. So we see above average growth. We want atypical growth for those kids so we can see an increase in their achievement. I could also, after we kind of get out of MAP reading fluency, I can show you in MAP growth, the student profile. There's a goal setting section. Are y'all familiar with it? So you can kind of play around and see, okay, for Catherine, I'm going to put her growth goal 2 or 3 points more. You can plug that into that growth setting section and you can see how that will change her from meeting to exceeding. Did that help clarify that growth is just average, maintain your place? Just wanted to call, and I was like, oh, we could push those kiddos a little more.
Thank you. That was a big aha for me, was that when I was celebrating growth for my students, I was celebrating them meeting what was projected for them from NWEA, which is great that they were doing that. But for my students, like Catherine said, they need to do more. So we can get them out of those bottom quintiles, that red and that orange. I had to have bigger conversations with them and their educators too, their classroom teachers, to make sure that they were growing those students accordingly. Okay. What else are your educators asking about reading plans? That was a big one. Okay, so like we can get 5-star, like a 5-star Google review for answering that question. Catherine can for sure.
I used to be so proud of my Uber rating. I used to have such a great Uber rating, and now I don't. And it's because they typically take me to and from the airport, and I don't like to talk during that time. They're like, "How are you?" I'm fine. So give me a good review because on Uber they don't like me. So
Yeah. Should we take a look at the class profile really quick?
all right, have you all
If you-
started digging into the class profile for Mount Growth? It's been updated. It has those instructional area, things on it. They are.
Okay.
It's just such a big value add. They added in the instructional area layer.
That and like the little circle to show how many tests were complete or not. Really putting the onus back on them too. Love it, love it. All right.
Are there any questions in the chat? So there we have two people.
When do you plan on doing your MOI testing? Okay. 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 Yeah, well,
Y'all know that for Mount Reading Fluency, so Mount Growth can have those 1,600 and use that, but you know Mount Reading Fluency works differently.
They have to, you guys have to make.
mhm.
Okay.
Yep. That's our, yeah. Because just keep in mind that there are fixed terms in map reading fluency. So I always say, remember 2 dates, December 1st, January 1st. Those are your 2 dates. December 1st starts winter expectations. March 1st, I said January 1st, didn't I?
Yeah.
Sorry, December 1st, March 1st. Thinking about my father-in-law's birthday. December 1st starts winter, March 1st starts spring. And then the spring runs until about mid-June. We don't never have a definitive date for that day in June because it's tied to our summer release for back to school updates, which is typically like middle of June, like planned for like June 20th or 21st or so. But you'll get the information when the spring window does close. But this is important to know because what is going to happen is that students are going to be auto assigned a benchmark test on these dates. Without you, it's assigned by NWEA, it's automatic. So if you are doing progress monitoring as well, just be careful that on December 1st, you go in and reassign the progress monitoring to the students because they will actually benchmark before you want them to in January. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry.
And that's okay. And if
Yeah.
you- And I always say that's what, so I've had a district, and you might have seen this, but one teacher gives half of her class November 30th, and then they're like, okay, I'm gonna do middle of year for the rest of my class tomorrow on December 1st. That's when there's a term rollover. So the expectations look different because November 30th is still tied to fall. December 1st is tied to winter. Big shift.
Big
Shift
shift.
up one.
Yep, but it's the
Yeah.
same date every year, December 1st, March 1st. Keep that in mind.
And any questions, it's time to for your, you have so many people able to, help. I know you didn't bring your computers, but I know. Okay. I'll make sure y'all get that flyer for the office hours.
Absolutely. And if while we were talking today, you were thinking about professional learning too, like how I mentioned that in our central reports training, it goes through all the map reading fluency key terms for teachers. Field research allows you to do free PL with us if you test a certain amount of students too. So as you're thinking about professional learning for the rest of the year or even next school year too, definitely reach out to your account managers and we can help you talk through what your options are.
There's no more questions. I guess the online people can log off. We can hang out if there's any other questions.
Yeah.
And if not,
Yeah, thank you so much. I put the feedback form in the chat. It's good to be with you all today. Thank you.
And if you need to stop at the store on the way back.